We start with a little bit of good news on the banking crisis, which we've been following so closely this week. There's some optimism this morning among depositors and investors of First Republic Bank.
Yeah, the troubled bank has been facing growing concerns this week that it would be the next financial institution to topple in the fallout from the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. Like those two failed banks, First Republic also has a high number of uninsured deposits, and its stocks plummeted over the last few days amid worries of another bank run. But just yesterday, 11 major U.S. banks came to the rescue, throwing out a lifeline to First Republic to the tune of $30 billion in deposits. They're hoping the move shows confidence in the banking system. That was welcome news. It came as Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen addressed the recent market volatility during a hearing with the Senate Finance Committee, reassuring them the U.S. financial system is strong.
I can reassure the members of the committee that our banking system is sound and that Americans can feel confident that their deposits will be there when they need them.
All right, joining us now, we have NBC News congressional correspondent Julie Sirkin and Barron's reporter Carlton English here to break this all down for us. And Carlton, we'll start with you. I know that this plan, these 11 banks stepping in, welcome news. What do we know about this plan?
Yeah, so 11 of the largest banks in the U.S., including J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, and PNC, each depositing in the range of $1 to $5 billion for the bank. They've agreed to hold their deposits there for at least 120 days. And that gives First Republic basically a lifeline that it needs. But also, it's a much more symbolic gesture because while First Republic, as you noted, has been seeing, well, they do have a large amount of uninsured deposits. They have been seeing depositors pull their money. When you have 11 of the largest banks saying, you know what? We feel good about putting our money in your bank and we're going to do it, that should restore some faith in First Republic and also the broader banking system.
All right, Julie, let's bring you in here as well because Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen testified before the Senate Finance Committee yesterday, and we heard some lawmakers say they are worried that there is going to be some sort of new precedent where the government has to guarantee all deposits anytime a bank seems to be struggling. Why are they worried about that, and what did Secretary Yellen have to say?
Well, the bottom line is two things here. First of all, does basically, in some words of the Republican, quote unquote, bailing out two of these banks, that all of these deposits are guaranteed. Will that set a precedent that now they have to do this for other banks that potentially face the same situation? You're seeing what's happening with First Republic, so it's not too much of a stretch of the imagination. So that's one of the issues. And the second, who's going to pay for it? One Senator, John Tester, a Democrat, said he's concerned this money is going to come from taxpayers' pockets as this continues moving on, and we potentially see more and more bank runs, which Yellen says they're doing everything they can to try and prevent. Here's what she told lawmakers, though. Take a listen.
A bank only gets that treatment if a majority of the FDIC board, a supermajority of the Fed board, and I, in consultation with the president, determine that the failure to protect uninsured depositors would create systemic risk and significant economic and financial consequences.
What Carlton said here in terms of this being a symbolic gesture from these major banks in terms of giving the sum $30 billion to First Republic, that makes a lot of sense here because, look, Yellen said these were emergency measures that the government put forward in order to rescue these depositors who banked at Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. And by all of these banks on your screen coming forward, this is sort of a signal to lawmakers that, look, taxpayers are not going to be the ones paying the burden of this if more bank runs happen in the future.
Julie, thanks for that. And Carlton, in the last few days, we've seen the Federal Reserve issue this backstop in a way for both Credit Suisse and First Republic. They've both been saved right now. So what does this mean for the broader economics of this all? Is this stabilizing right now?
Yeah, I do think that we're seeing the crisis stabilize a bit. That does not mean that the next few weeks are going to be easy, of course, because when you're in trouble, it takes a while to get out of it. But I think what we're seeing from lawmakers and also the Fed is they want to maintain the notion that the banking system is secure, especially depositors' accounts are insured and safe. Because when you think about some of these uninsured deposits, some people may say, oh, it's people with millions of dollars, but it's a lot of businesses that have employees, and that's where you talk about the systemic risk issue. If those deposits aren't insured, that's payrolls, that's other vendors. So the Fed, especially with its new banking backstop program that it announced, it makes it easier and more attractive for banks to borrow if they have to, and they're borrowing against assets that are backed by the U.S. government that the banks already hold. So that should create a little bit more flexibility for banks that might be facing difficulty.
We haven't seen as many bank runs as I think people initially thought when some of this happened, right?
Exactly. We had a few high-profile bank runs. I mean, Silicon Valley and Signature Bank, First Republic. Again, a very concentrated deposit base. But even in my speaking with some of the regional banks that you would think would be susceptible to this, a lot of people are keeping their money with them. And the thing to keep in mind is it is tough to change a bank. Most people don't want to do it.
Yeah, I don't want to do that. All right. Carlton English, Julie Sirkin, thank you both.
Thank you.
Now to the ongoing fallout from Tuesday's aerial encounter between a Russian fighter jet and a U.S. spy drone over the Black Sea. The White House says yesterday's dramatic footage purporting to show the incident, quote, decimates the Russian lie about what they say happened. Russian officials claim their jet did not hit the U.S. drone. Meanwhile, Chinese President Xi Jinping is set to visit Moscow next week for talks with Russian President Vladimir Putin. The state visit comes amid growing U.S. concerns that Beijing is considering sending lethal aid to support Russia in its war against Ukraine. NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba joins us now for more on all of this. Monica, let's start with the incident in the Black Sea. The Pentagon released this footage fairly quickly. Why did they decide to do that, and what are you hearing from White House officials?
Hi there, Ellison. That's right. Essentially, this was to combat the narrative that the Russians had put out, that they didn't interact, that their aircraft didn't come into contact with this U.S. drone. And that's why the Pentagon released this footage that clearly shows that the Russian jet, as you see there, approaches the drone, pours fuel on it, and then returns several times, eventually clipping those propeller blades, which is what led the U.S. to decide that ultimately they needed to down it, but not before wiping what they believe was the most sensitive data from there. So there's still major questions, though, about why this happened, what contributed to it. And we heard a little bit more from White House spokesman John Kirby on that assessment yesterday.
It's pretty darn obvious when you look at that video that fighter jet hit our drone. At best, it's reckless flying. At worst, it's reckless and incompetent. We don't know whether it is also intentional.
And we may never know whether it was intentional, according to U.S. officials, but certainly it contributes to these rising tensions. But the U.S. was very clear yesterday that they don't seek conflict with Russia. Again, this all happened over international airspace. The Kremlin continues to say the U.S. was acting in a hostile manner. But that's why I think you saw the Pentagon release this video, again, to refute that and to back the U.S. narrative of what really occurred here, Ellison.
Has Russia commented since this footage came out?
So they said from the very beginning, again, that this was not their doing. They tried to deny any of that. And then since the video has come out, we haven't really seen as much of a response. The Russian Foreign Ministry just continues to say that it was the U.S. acting irresponsibly, when, of course, that's what Secretary of State Blinken has continued to say of the Russians. But we did hear a little bit more about the recovery efforts now underway, which, because of the depths of the Black Sea, are going to be completely complicated. But the Pentagon did offer a little more insight into how that could work if it does take place yesterday.
We do have indications that Russia is likely making an effort to try to recover MQ-9 debris. However, we assess it's very unlikely that they would be able to recover anything useful, given a couple of factors. One, the fact, and I'm not going to go into details, but that we took steps to protect information aboard that aircraft. And two, the fact that it crashed in extremely deep water.
So now the U.S. says they will continue to operate and fly U.S. drones in this region. They won't make any changes to that, but certainly another incident like this would add to already very tense relationships between the U.S. and Russia at this time, also.
And Monica, quickly, while we have you, we mentioned earlier Chinese President Xi plans to sit down with Russian President Putin next week. How closely is the White House going to watch that?
They'll very much be watching this, and that's because we already know that China had offered non-lethal aid to Russia in its invasion of Ukraine. But there were fears over the last couple of weeks that that could change to lethal aid. And that's when we're talking about weapons, artillery, ammunition, things you would actually see on the battlefield that could contribute to loss of life. Now, U.S. intelligence officials believe that hasn't occurred yet. But again, given these talks, they'll be watching very closely to see if that does escalate to the next step, which would be incredibly significant, in which the U.S. says would be a bit of a game changer here, and that then China would face repercussions should they decide to make that move. Allison.
Right. Monica Alba, thank you so much.
Well, new this morning, more charges in the case of the Virginia man who died shortly after police deputies escorted him to a hospital for a mental health incident, with 7 Virginia deputies and 3 hospital employees currently facing second-degree murder charges. The family of Ivo Itenio continuing to demand answers in the death of their loved one. NBC News correspondent Katie Beck has more.
Calls for justice in Virginia after one family claims a mental health crisis led to murder at the hands of law enforcement. Ivo Itenio's mother says her son was tortured by deputies after a transport to a mental hospital.
He was murdered. They smothered the breath out of my baby.
Today, 3 employees of the mental hospital charged with second-degree murder for their role in Ivo Itenio's death. This after 7 Henrico County Sheriff's deputies were charged with second-degree murder charges in the incident, all currently on administrative leave. Attorneys say 28-year-old Ivo Itenio was at home amidst a mental health crisis. Deputies responding after receiving a call he'd been seen gathering solar-powered lawn lights from a neighbor's yard. Itenio's family and his attorneys say days later in custody during intake at a mental hospital in handcuffs and shackles that he was smothered to death by deputies.
Can someone explain to me why my brother is not here right now? Someone explain to me why my mother can't sleep, can't eat. We're broken.
The area's top prosecutor saying he died from being piled on and couldn't breathe.
It's just cruel and a demonstration of power that is unlawful. I mean, it killed him.
Thursday, Itenio's family and attorneys viewed surveillance footage from inside the jail and mental hospital where Itenio later died. Attorneys and family describing Itenio left naked in his jail cell, handled harshly into transport, and then during intake at the mental hospital, a brutal 11-minute pummeling, where they say with restraints on, Itenio is pushed off a chair onto the floor, suffering the full weight and force of 10 people on top of him.
You could see his hair being pulled, and you could see knees toward his head. It was excruciating to watch.
The Henrico Police Union says they're standing behind the deputies. An attorney for one deputy saying Itenio was being combative at intake and had a history of mental illness incidents, and says these charges are premature.
I believe is still that they were doing their job and they're doing it the best they could. None of them are known as bullies.
My son was treated like a dog, worse than a dog. I saw it with my own eyes on the video.
The Commonwealth's attorney says that video is a key piece of evidence in her case, and to protect the integrity of the ongoing investigation, she will not be releasing it at this time. Back to you.
Katie Beck, thanks so much.
Pleasure.
All right, let's get a check at your forecast as we head into this St. Patrick's Day.
Meteorologist Bill Cairns joins us now with the latest. Bill, good morning.
Yeah, good Friday morning. Happy St. Patrick's Day to you guys. We had some nasty storms rolling through the Dallas-Fort Worth area yesterday. So before I show you the video, I want to show you the storms themselves. So here's the Dallas area. All these little white dots are where we had reports of large hail. These were huge hail-producing storms. Many reports of tennis ball, one report of baseball-sized hail. That's enough to shatter windshields. Let me show you some of the damage that was left over. So this storm was at one point tornado warned. The sirens were going off there in the Fort Worth area. This is Irving, Texas, and you can see how windy it is, and you can see some of the damage that was done by these storms. So there is some cleanup that needs to take place during the day today, and that's a lot of cleanup to that building. So let's get to the forecast for today, because this storm system's not done yet. We are watching it weakening, but we still have a chance of isolated severe storms. So this is just a shield of rain heading over Ohio and Pennsylvania. Atlanta, we got some some showers and storms just to your north. But to the south here, this is where we could get some isolated strong storms later today. Notice all the lightning strikes in central Louisiana. That's going to fall down over the top of New Orleans, Biloxi, Mobile, all the way back to Pensacola, Panama City as we head through the evening, maybe even towards Tallahassee tonight. So isolated severe storms in this region. It's not going to be widespread, and maybe a slight chance of a tornado. So here's the timing of all this mess during today for your St. Patrick's Day. Of course, there's a lot of people wondering about parades and activities out there, too. We'll get to that in a second. But notice the rain in the northeast, it kind of falls apart. It doesn't really stay together much. Not the same, though. Atlanta, unfortunately, pretty rainy afternoon. If you plan on driving home in the rain, and that rain and showers will be down through the panhandle. Tomorrow, that front kicks off the East Coast, but it stalls out here in Florida, so isolated chance of some showers and storms. So here's your St. Patrick's Day forecast. Of course, we like to pick some of our fun places like Luck, Wisconsin, and Golden, Colorado, Rainbow City, Arizona. I don't make this stuff up. We search this out. Evergreen, Alabama. And as far as your forecast goes for the parades, now the New York parade is today. Clouds will move in, mid-50s. Couldn't ask for much better than that. That's gorgeous. Savannah, if you've ever been to Savannah on St. Patrick's Day, like the population of the city is like times 10. It's insane. Beautiful weather, though. Should be great for your parade. And Boston looks a little chilly, though. That parade is on Sunday, guys, and in the 30s. So bundle up there in Beantown.
Ooh. Busy weekend.
Yeah, lots of green on that map. I like that. And
Thanks,
the tie. Bill, thank you. All right, well, March Madness is back, and it's already got its share of upsets and controversy. The Alabama Crimson Tide advanced from the first round yesterday, all after the team's star player was linked to a deadly shooting. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock has the latest.
The first 2 days of March Madness are a basketball blitz. 32 games in 48 hours, marked by last-second theatrics, like Furman pulling out this incredible steal and three-pointer to knock off Virginia. But this year, there's a major headline off the court. Brandon Miller, the top player on the #1 overall seed. Miller has been linked to a tragic killing in Tuscaloosa. After a police officer testified in court, Miller brought a gun to a former teammate that was ultimately used to kill a 23-year-old mother. 2 men, including that former teammate, face capital murder charges. Miller has not been charged with a crime, and his attorney maintains he had no idea what the gun was for.
This whole situation is just really heartbreaking.
Now, the player widely considered the best in the tournament has armed security at games.
How unusual is that set of circumstances?
I've never seen it before in my career covering the NCAA tournament.
Dan Wolkin writes for USA Today and covers college basketball.
The legal system decided that there were no charges merited. The University of Alabama says Brandon Miller is clear to play. But what does the court of public opinion say?
Inside all of college sports is a little bit of dismay that Alabama's handled it this way, that essentially they've said, as long as there were no criminal charges brought against Brandon Miller, that's standard, that's the bar.
The next test, how a nation will respond if or when the Crimson Tide makes a run, thrusting Miller even deeper into the spotlight. Sam Brock, NBC News.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.